Thank you for the recess. I will yield the remainder of my time back to the gentleman after these short additions. Mr. President, on behalf of the 50 United States of America, I tender the resignations of all these United States on behalf of the governors who have met in Las Vegas in the past week to discuss their grievances with the federal government, and they have unanimously decided to effectively fire the federal government by seceding from the Union and reunite without any governing body, and in particular without the current federal government. The people of the United States are so fed up with the useless and senseless wars, and the overtaxation, and the burdens placed on them by the controls and manipulations, that we have decided it's best if the federal government doesn't exist anymore. I have covered 32 of their grievances, and I am now ready to proceed with number 33. Illegal seizure of private property. We have the TSA stealing private property, the IRS stealing private property, the FBI stealing private property, and the federal government seizing private property. The county sheriff seizes private property from those who deal drugs, but the police are told not to arrest the kingpins because they sell drugs for the CIA. The IRS has the sheriff commit felonies against the private citizen when there is an accusation of not filing a federal tax return. And first of all, the IRS is a private corporation and not part of the U.S. Treasury. There is no law on the books that Americans working in America have to file a tax return or pay anything to the IRS, according to Joe Bannister, who used to carry a gun and work for the IRS, until he learned that there is no such law. The FBI has seized private cameras without warrants on two very important occasions: the John F. Kennedy assassination and the Pentagon missile attack of 9/11. And we feel that these were illegal and unconstitutional seizures by government, and we want to know why. We have never seen any of the footage that was seized illegally. What is government hiding? Why does government use a federal agency to break the law and violate the Constitution? Why is the federal agency used to cover up these very serious crimes of murder? One being a president who just happened to have printed United States notes and had plans to do away with the Federal Reserve System. And in the other case, the murder of Pentagon employees. There are many other questions that government refuses to answer about 9/11. Like, why did Dick Cheney tell an aide to allow the fighter to come in when it was 50 miles out, 30 miles out, and so on? Why can't we ask Dick Cheney to explain his actions to the public? What was he thinking in the moments leading up to the missile attack? The public has a right to know. We find government seizing property to cover up very serious crimes, and we see government using government agencies to do so, and we want to know why. Who authorizes these crimes and cover-ups? We would like an impartial investigation, but whenever government investigates anything, it's another cover-up, it seems. For example, the Omission Commission report of 9/11 left us with so many unanswered questions and irrational explanations, defying science and whitewashing the cover-up and crime. One is led to believe that government did 9/11. Another example is the Warren report. How do those who murdered the president convince the Supreme Court, the FBI, the CIA, the new President Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, and doctors to all cooperate in the murder of the president in broad daylight with dozens of cameras rolling? Who has this kind of power? Certainly not Fidel Castro. There is only one possible answer, and that is the Federal Reserve Mafia. When will we, the people, know the truth about the JFK assassination and the Pentagon missile attack or the destruction of the World Trade Center buildings in New York? Until we know the truth, we want to pull out, because we don't like being part of any conspiracy to hide the truth from the American people, especially when the president is murdered or the Pentagon is attacked. Especially when laws like the Patriot Act are passed almost immediately afterward, and the Patriot Act eviscerates the Bill of Rights from the Constitution. Especially when we are lied to about weapons of mass destruction, and a war is waged costing trillions of dollars, and that war makes a handful very rich and impoverishes an entire nation. We don't agree with government, and we see what power has done. We see who controls the money, and we know who covered up the crimes, and we know that taxpayer money has been wasted. We, the people of the United States, feel that $2 trillion could be spent a lot wiser, and secession will turn this around and give us more bang for our buck. More fairness not only for Americans, but for the world. We begin with a seizure of private property, and it leads us to wars and laws and murders and cover-ups, and it all stinks. We want out. Americans don't want to be part of any conspiracy to take what belongs to others, especially when there are millions of murders involved. We cite the seizure of private property as our 33rd reason for secession. This grievance pulls out a lot of other crimes when any investigator follows the money trail. What we learn about government is frightening, and we pull on the string that is connected to the seizure of private property, and we learn so much about the true nature of government. Private property must not be taken without a warrant. That's what the framers of the Constitution said in the Constitution. Maybe they knew that government seizure of private property would allow government to do many illegal things against the people, not only in America, but in the world. What are we going to do when the entire world knows the truth? Grievance number 34, FBI confiscation of videos. If you're going to use a federal agency to help you cover up crimes, you have to understand that investigations will discover the connection between the seizure of private property and the confiscation of videos by the FBI. The FBI is supposed to investigate, that's all, not seize private property. The FBI is not supposed to make arrests or help you in the cover-up of crimes. But we see clearly now that the FBI is involved in the cover-up of very serious crimes, and we want to know why the public was never told the truth, and why the FBI never gave us a report about what they found on the JFK assassination videos. Why have 50 years passed and nobody has ever seen those videos? What truth will they reveal, and who will suffer as a result? The people will benefit by knowing the truth. It's time to reveal the content of those videos for the public. Who would go to jail for murder if the people knew the truth? Why is the truth about the Pentagon missile attack a matter of national security? The people need an explanation. If it was a plane that hit the Pentagon, why can't you show us the frames which prove that it was a plane? It is so obvious that you are lying. It is so obvious that you are covering up murders, and we want to know who is behind it. The more unanswered questions there are, the more guilty the government looks. The government has maintained that the act of terrorism was committed by 19 Arabs with box cutters, and we know that that's impossible. Too many irrefutable facts have now been released, and 19 Arabs with box cutters is not possible. What are you afraid of? Would Dick Cheney die in prison? Would the truth about Donald Rumsfeld be known? Would he have to cancel his book lectures in which he tells America what a hero he is for participating in the murder of innocent Americans on American soil, so that a handful of greedy men can steal Iraqi oil from the citizens of that sovereign nation? Who is responsible for all of the deaths of civilians in Iraq, including many children? Once again, the complaint we have with the FBI confiscation of videos at the JFK assassination and the Pentagon missile attack of 2001 lead us to corruption and murder by our government. We don't want to be part of this, and we hereby secede from the Union. Grievance number 35, 9/11 lies and cover-ups. All of these crimes are connected. All of them brutal murders of citizens of this country and other countries. President Kennedy may have been the last president elected by the people. All the others have been appointments. Why continue the charade? Why continue attempting to fool the American people into thinking that they are actually electing a president? When we follow the money on 9/11, there is $950 billion in gold, which was stored at the World Trade Center towers, and then we have the wealth of the Iraqi oil that was taken. Who wound up with this money? We need the truth finally. We know we will never get it from this government, and it is the basis for our secession. Secession does not mean civil war. This is not North against South, or East against West, or elite against common people. This is the people versus the federal government. We, the people, desire to fire the federal government. We are not satisfied. We feel coerced, abused, oppressed. We want to bring this era to an end. The era of big government and overtaxation, endless wars, and abomination. What better note to end on than a president who doesn't have a birth certificate? We were led into war on a claim that intelligence reports proved, without a doubt, that there were weapons of mass destruction. $2 trillion later, we find out there were no weapons of mass destruction. We were told that there was a connection between Iraq and this fictitious group you call Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda sits right next to Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. All fictional characters, created for a purpose, to fool children. Well, we're not fooled anymore. We see no connection whatsoever between the former dictator of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, and this group you call Al-Qaeda. This fictional character is laughable. We know the truth. We know that government created Al-Qaeda and used it as a scapegoat. We know that the Patriot Act was passed following terrorist attacks that we feel were inside jobs. Government told us they were bringing democracy to Iraq, and we found out that was not true. We now know that the U.S. has brought nothing but grief to this occupied sovereign nation, and we demand an end to it immediately. And we feel that secession is the only way to bring this about. We never get a straight answer when we ask how much longer will we be occupying this country? How much longer will we be paying all the bills for this unnecessary war in which nothing is achieved but the theft of oil? We feel the Iraqi people are worse off today than they ever were under Saddam Hussein. We feel the invasion is a war crime. We do not support any government that commits war crimes. There are still many Americans that are not awake to the truth, and when they awake, we fear what might happen in this country. We see many innocent people being slaughtered, just as they were in Iraq and Afghanistan. We feel the best thing we can do is cut off funding to the federal government, secede from the federal government, effectively fire the federal government. And we cite the lies told about 9/11 as our 35th grievance with government, and this grievance provides the basis for our decision to secede from the Union. We will put the United States back together again in short time, but we have learned our lessons about having a federal government, and next time I think we're going to leave that out. We are much better off without a federal government if government lies to the people and commits murder of millions of innocents while stealing oil from invaded sovereign nations. The question of why government killed our people on our soil has been answered, but the crimes remain unpunished, and we don't have any hope, after 13 years of occupying Iraq, that anyone will ever be arrested. The government is a mafia, and nobody is safe. Not at home and not abroad. The power and might of the United States is being misused, and we want to bring this to an end today. The World Trade Center buildings were demolished after years of planning, and the Patriot Act was written over several months in advance in anticipation of this treasonous crime, which was committed by dozens of people inside government and working for governmental agencies. It's time to call this era of crime by government to an end.
Hi guys, today we're going to discuss how you can find the perfect video editing solution. So, recently HitFilm made a video on how to choose a computer to use HitFilm 4 on, but today we're going to be looking at the bigger picture. The first thing that affects how well you edit your video is obviously your computer specs. I'm not going to go too in-depth in this because HitFilm's video covers this pretty well. They say almost exactly what I would have said. Get an SSD, at least 16 gigs of RAM, although 8 gigs is okay, an i5 or i7 processor, and a great GPU such as the model and website that they recommend in their video. The only difference I would make is that maybe I'd get a smaller SSD, for example 250 gigabytes, to save money, and then get the rest of your storage as an ordinary hard drive. You edit video on the SSD, and when you're done, you just move all your files onto the hard drive for storage. So the second thing is the type of video you're editing. If you're editing in 720p, 1080p, 4K, whether it be 30 frames per second, 60 or 120 frames per second, whether you're just doing cuts and dragging your videos around, maybe you're doing basic grading, slow motion, or complicated VFX and 3D work, doing basic 720p drag and drop work is going to require a lot less specs than 4K 60p with 3D and lots of visual effects. Third, the application you're using. In their video, the HitFilm channel obviously only used HitFilm, but depending on the app and settings, you may get different results. So let's start with my personal setup. I have a late 2013 21-inch iMac. It has 1TB hard drive, an i5 processor with 2.7 GHz, 8 GB of DDR3 RAM, and 1500 megs of Intel Iris Pro graphic card, which is very good. Let's start in HitFilm. When I drop 1080p 30 footage into HitFilm, it plays back pretty smoothly in full resolution. When I start adding grades, it gets slightly more jittery, and when I start adding stock footage and 3D layers, I'm forced to make a RAM preview to get it to play back properly. But in HitFilm, editing in 4K is just a nightmare. Dropping 4K footage in, it plays back at 3 frames per second, and dropping it to quarter resolution only makes it 6 frames per second. After some basic grading, 1080p 30 and 1080p 60 both play back pretty smoothly at full resolution, and 4K only plays back at 2.5 frames per second at full resolution. With 3D work and visual effects, both become choppy. So working with HitFilm is a blast at 1080 for me, but once we get into heavy VFX, as in pretty heavy VFX, or 4K work, it just becomes unusable. So how can we upgrade this? Well, we can either get better computer gear such as a solid state drive or a good i7 processor, or we could convert our 4K footage into 1080p. But the last option is to switch programs. First, we're going to go into DaVinci Resolve 12.5, another free video editing application with a lot of focus on color grading. In DaVinci, footage plays back even worse. 1080p 30 plays back fine normally, but after grading it does lag quite a bit. How I'd expect a 1080p clip with a ton of VFX to play back in HitFilm. 4K is even worse. Without any grading, it plays back at less than 1 frames per second. You heard me, less than 1 frame per second. And after grading, well, we don't need to talk about that. So now we're going to switch to another program. And for all you PC users out there, who I know a lot of you are PC users, we're going to go with iMovie. iMovie is another free video editing software, but it's only available on Mac, and it was created by Apple. Dragging 1080p 30 video into iMovie, it plays back perfectly smooth. Adding a basic grade, it also plays back perfectly smoothly. Time for 1080p 60. It plays back a tiny bit jittery, and the same after a basic grade. You can't do very much visual effects in iMovie, because it's just a simple application. Now for 4K, and this is where iMovie really shines. 4K plays back perfectly smoothly. Even after a simple grade, it plays back almost exactly the same. That is amazing. As you saw in DaVinci Resolve, it only played back at 1 frame per second. Now we're playing back at 30 times that speed. As an extra test, I turn on the stabilize shaky video function and rolling shutter reduction, and it plays back almost perfectly smoothly. On top of this, I applied the film grain filter, and it plays back extremely well, much better than HitFilm or DaVinci could play back 4K footage that hasn't been edited at all. And iMovie can export in 4K too, just like DaVinci Resolve, which is something that HitFilm 4 Express can't do. So why is iMovie so good? This is because iMovie is made by Apple, and so is the operating system. Apple designed this software so it fits in perfectly with Macs and OS X, and render times are really quick too. But iMovie is a pretty simple application. This is where Final Cut Pro comes in. It's pretty much an advanced iMovie. You can't do VFX like you can in HitFilm, but it is pretty powerful and also expensive at $300 US. But if you're editing in 4K, I would rather spend my money on a decent Mac and Final Cut Pro X than a super maxed out PC and Premiere or HitFilm. So that's it guys. HitFilm isn't bad, but for 4K work, get a Mac and use iMovie or Final Cut Pro X. If you're doing visual effects though, Final Cut Pro only has motion, which is, to be honest, not the best. If you're doing visual effects, I would still recommend HitFilm 4 Pro or HitFilm 4 Express because they do very well in that regard. And they don't edit too badly compared to other programs such as DaVinci Resolve and also Premiere. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all next week. Stay shiny. Bye.